Hey everybody, Lindsay Smith here with your business tip this week. This week I want to give you a very simple, basic explanation on how rent-to-owns work. Now just take note that sometimes these are called lease options. I was asked a question over the weekend about how a rent-to-own works, how a realtor gets paid off a rent-to-own, and I'm going to give you a quick explanation on that, but it's probably going to bring up a lot of questions. This isn't something normally that realtors do, but I do think it's important in case you get asked by a buyer what a rent-to-own is, you can explain it properly. What a rent-to-own is basically a rental with an option to purchase the property at a predetermined price at the end of the rental agreement. So, for example, you can have a rental that runs for 3 years, 5 years, whatever it ends up being, and at the end of that period, you would have an option to purchase the property at a set price. So let's say today the value of the property is $350,000. You have a 2-year rent-to-own or a 2-year lease option, and let's say you have an option to buy that property for $360,000 at the end, so for $10,000 more. And all of those terms are completely negotiable. Some of the things that typically happen is that a buyer would give a deposit at the beginning of the rent-to-own. Note that title transfer stays with the original owner. It doesn't actually transfer until the end of the lease option or to when the actual option to purchase is exercised and the person actually buys the property. So there isn't a purchase contract. It's simply a rental contract with an option to buy at the end of it. What a buyer would typically do is give a deposit at the beginning that would be non-refundable, and if they exercise the option at the end to purchase the property, so they ended up qualifying for the property at the end, then that money would be given towards the purchase price or applied towards the purchase price. In the case where the buyer does not buy it at the end, then that deposit would be forfeited to the landlord at the time. Keep in mind, the typical reason why someone does a rent-to-own if they're a buyer is because they can't currently qualify, they want the property, they might have a down payment and be able to afford the monthly payments, but their credit isn't such that it's suitable. Or the alternative is that they might have not have enough to save up for a down payment yet, and in that case, they can rent-to-own while they save up more of the money to qualify at the end of it. So at the end of the process, they're actually qualifying. Some people structure it that a certain amount of the rental income is applied towards a down payment at the end, so let's say $200 a month is applied towards a down payment, and sometimes that money is forfeited if the person doesn't qualify at the end of the lease option, or that lease option can just be renewed, that rental period can just be renewed again, and a new option price can be negotiated at the end of it. That's a very, very basic explanation. Think of it like leasing a car. You rent it for a period, and you have an option to buy it out at the end. That's all that a rent-to-own is. The last thing I'll touch on is how a realtor gets paid commissions. Well, typically commissions aren't payable until there's actually a transfer of land. So you can either say, I'm not going to get paid anything up front, and write it in so that you get paid at the end of the transaction, but it gets a little bit messy. So one of the things that I do recommend is you get paid a portion of money up front and some at the end when the property actually closes. You're going to need to talk to a lawyer about this to write it up properly. Remember, it needs to get paid to the brokerage. It's not that clean. I actually recommend you guys avoid these situations if at all possible. But if you are familiar with them, you know how to write them up, you have a good lawyer that can write it up for you properly, then in that case, you can make it work. But a seller can pay you in advance for your services as long as it goes through the brokerage. So that's a brief explanation on rent-to-own. I'm sure there's a lot more questions out there, but make sure you consult a lawyer to get your questions answered and do it properly. That's your business tip this week. All the best in doing a ton of business for the rest of the year.